to events around you. I think all of us need time sometimes to sit and to think. And it's harder in our age today because everything's right in front of us. I mean, Facebook is kind of like the National Enquirer of the internet. It's right. Everything is just like right out there, and then there's YouTube, and then there's all the other websites and blogs where things get copied and pasted, and everything goes viral. And it's very easy for people to do that rather than to investigate the actual events themselves and find out what is the evidence for this or that new event. And I have to make sure that I do that.
On this particular line of inquiry, what would you perceive as the role of the alternative media today? And sort of what advice would you give to those people out there like yourself who are on this journey communicating this kind of information?
Yeah, you ask great questions. I think kind of along the lines of what I've been indicating, which is that you got to be fearless. You have to be prepared to accept, all kinds of conclusions that are out there, because what we've been fed 24/7 by a mainstream propaganda industry is just one lie after another after another. So in other words, I'm absolutely convinced that the more someone watches CNN or any of these other mainstream, the less likely they are to understand the actual machinations of the world around them. The more that the world is going to seem like a big fog to them when some new event happens. So we have to be fearless. But on the other side, and this is the difficulty, deep investigation is necessary. And deep, what I would call epistemology is necessary. In other words, we need to be asking ourselves the questions that you learn in Philosophy 101, which is, how do you know what you know? It means that the alternative media needs to be able to check sources as rigorously as possible and not to be inclined to promote something simply because it's what they want to believe to be true, or what they believe already to be true. It means subjecting ourselves to as much critical rigor as possible. And also, since you've got me on this question, to as little grandstanding and emotional ranting as possible. There's a lot of that. A lot of the very popular alternative media figures, and I won't even mention names, anyone who listens knows, they do good work. It's not that, but when you start yelling and getting emotional and becoming clearly affiliated with promoting an agenda, then really you don't help the cause. You chip away at your own credibility. And what we really, I think, should strive to do is as much detached, calm, objective analysis as we're able to bring to bear, so that we can have a conversation with these outside skeptical people who are going to have enough trouble as it is with what we have to say, and it'll be easier for them if they're engaging with people who sound a little bit like them.
Freedom of information is an important part of our evolutionary process at the moment. What is your view on freedom of information and its importance with what you're doing? As a historian, Obviously fact is important.
Exactly.
And getting to know the fact as free and fair and not controlled by anybody. Give me that perspective.
Well, we live in a very we live in an era of contradictions regarding freedom of information. On the one hand, we have the internet, we have the web, and we're having a global conversation in a way that was unthinkable 25 years ago, where people from everywhere around the world, there are no exceptions any longer. The web is everywhere. Now, there's censorship on the web, but really, the global connectivity is pretty much everywhere. And so we're able to learn things that were just not possible to learn previously. On the other hand, we're dealing with a great restriction of information as well. Looking at the United States archival system, for example, it is widely believed now that more than 50% of all U.S. government documents are classified in one way or another. So if you're thinking of it as an archivist trying to reconstruct the history of your government, well, you might just say that more than half of your government's history is secret. Wow. And so, that's the U.S., but do we really think that other nations are different? Other nations might be worse, they might be better, but basically we're dealing with a situation of widespread secrecy. So we need to have no illusions about this. This is a very difficult age in which we live. The United States passed its first significant Freedom of Information Act in the 70s. There had been one previously that didn't have much teeth. In 74, 75, the U.S. got a pretty good number of changes to FOIA that for about 6-7 years, into the early 80s, allowed researchers, especially regarding UFOs, to get thousands of pages of documents on this topic that had not been available before. But then, guess what? Through the Reagan years, FOIA was severely cut and made much more expensive, much less responsive to people. And it's had its ups and downs ever since. And it's in a down era, no question about it. Where, in fact, during the late end of the Clinton administration, a number of documents that had been declassified in the early 90s suddenly were reclassified. So that perversely, if you as a researcher had gotten a document out of the archives in 1995, you might find in 1999 that it was illegal for you to have that document. So that you could keep it, but you wouldn't be able to publish it any longer. And that actually has happened. So we're in an era, at least in my country, where this is not, it's not a given that we'll have access to information. And one of the key elements, one of the key, let me think of it this way. One of the most important foundations for our belief in freedom of information is that we have a democratic system of government. But in fact, if you're unable to get true access to information, you have to ask yourself, do you really have a democratic system of government? Are you dealing with an authoritarian system of government, which I think we are to a large degree? And if that's so, what does that say about the struggle for truth? In other words, American researchers and also researchers from other nations need to understand that they are not dealing with a so-called level playing field. We're dealing with a rigged game in a lot of ways. And we don't have the luxury of getting all of these declassified documents that we would like to have. We know we're dealing with a topic that deals with national security, that is highly classified, and we have to play this silly game now of waiting for leaks and waiting for someone to tell us this or that thing. And the problem with leaks is, when you get one, outsiders say, oh, well, it's a leak. What's the name? What's the source? Prove it, prove it, prove it. And that's not easy to do. Yeah. So, but having said all of that, you see, the beauty of our age that we live in is that, there are three factors in this equation of secrecy. There's these other beings, whoever, whatever they are. There's the secret keepers. But then the other part of the equation is us, our society. And in fact, we are the true variable in this equation. We are the part that's changing so dramatically right now. You think of our world 50 plus years ago, we lived in a totally different world. And now you look at our world today. We are on some kind of fast track toward transforming ourselves, not just as a society, not even just as a civilization, but really as a species. We're moving into an age of super advanced computing, artificial intelligence, sentient computing, in which, and then biotech changes, in which we ourselves are, what are we going to look like in 100 years as a society? Have you wondered? We're not going to look like this. We're not going to be stuck in 2011 forever. We're going to have capabilities in a short period of time as a society in which we can somehow, we're going to make a breakthrough in proving and communicating the reality of all of this. And when that happens, you see, that's going to force open these floodgates. And the powers that be are going to have to scramble to try to maintain control over the spin, over the dispensation of that data, but it's going to be a very difficult struggle for them. Because once this reality is on the table for public discussion, well, all hell is going to break loose.
Before we close off the interview, is there anything else you'd like to contribute?
Well, I don't know. I think we've covered quite a lot, haven't we? Again, I think it's important for all of us to go into this reality with our eyes as open as possible. I have a feeling that when I look at around me and the world that we live in, there are a lot of people who who do have their eyes open and who are ready for this. But there are many people who don't have the opportunity. They have to work. They've got things to do, and they're in this zone. And so when we are confronted with the reality of these other beings that are operating at a different level than we are, that have vastly different technology, different agenda, different level of consciousness, we're going to have a challenge to meet that level of consciousness in some way or another. And I ask myself, are we as a society moving toward a greater level of consciousness to deal with this challenge? And I think, a little bit we are. But in a large measure, maybe we're not. Certainly, television culture is not helping us. Certainly, our media culture is not helping us for the most part. Our political, even academic cultures are really, I don't think, getting us to this level of meeting this challenge. So the only thing that's going to get us there is, unfortunately, the shock. The shock of this reality, boom, being right here, laid right before us. And probably for a week or two or more, a bunch of people will be running around in circles, pulling the hair out of their heads. But the thing is, eventually, we're going to have to calm down. And we're going to have to deal with this. And that is the moment in which billions of people on planet Earth are going to have a moment with themselves. And they're going to say, have I been wasting my life? Is there another way for me to create my own life, to envision how I can live as a human being? Because there are these other beings here, and they don't operate like we do. And so I think that's going to be the great wake-up call for us as a species. I would like to think that it'll happen on a more gradual basis, that our ever-expanding consciousness will get us to that reality. But some people see that happening. I don't. What I think is going to happen is a little bit more of an unpleasant shock, a jolt, but I still think we'll get to it. Anyway.
Richard Dolan, it's been an honor and a privilege to have your time today. Thank you very much for the information, and we look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thanks so much, Mel.